Some decisions can be very, very hard. Now, there are some decisions that we make awfully hard. Some people, the decision, what do you want to eat, that becomes, an entire ordeal. But there are some decisions that are genuinely difficult for us to reach. And the reasons can be, it can be because there's a whole lot of different options that come into play. I have all of these different options, and with this decision, which one do I need to pick? Which one's right? Which one's wrong? Sometimes the decision can be really hard to make because you know what the right thing to do is, but the right thing to do is the hard thing, and that's a tough path. That's a tough path to choose to walk down. There's a number of reasons why a decision can be very difficult. However, the decision making process itself can be heavily simplified if, before the choice ever comes up, the answer to the decision's already been made. If you already know what the answer is before the choice ever comes up, the decision-making process becomes easier. Doesn't mean that the choice is always easier, but the decision-making process becomes easier. Jesus, we saw, had been arrested, and he was taken before Annas initially. That was not one of the trials that happened. It was more of an interrogation at that point in time. Annas and his family largely controlled the office of the high priest. I had mentioned that to you last week. Annas, prior to this, had been the high priest. He had 5 sons who had all served in the office of the high priest. At the time that Jesus was arrested and crucified, his son-in-law was the high priest. After Caiaphas, his son-in-law, then Annas would become high priest again. So it was kind of a heavily controlled office. But what Annas was doing in that questioning, because remember, they had to expedite the entire plan in arresting Jesus, because Jesus had exposed Judas, and so the plan originally was to arrest Jesus after the Passover, but because Jesus had exposed Judas, they're having to speed everything up, and they're having to kind of to throw everything together. And so Annas was trying to get Jesus to say something in that questioning that he could go to that when they went to Caiaphas's house, and Annas could say, Jesus said this, and this is a reason by which we can crucify, or we can have him killed. In the meantime, we saw that Peter was also facing a spiritual crisis. Peter had gone to the house of Caiaphas, and we'll talk more about that. He didn't go to the house of Annas. He went to the house of Caiaphas, and there he faced crucifix, or his own crisis, when when a servant girl said, "Hey, aren't you one of Jesus' disciples?" And he denied Jesus for the first time. And we pick back up tonight with Peter's side of what was happening in verse number 25 of John 18. It says, "Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, and they said to him, 'You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?' And he denied it and said, 'I am not.' One of the high priest's slaves, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, 'Didn't I see you with him in the garden?' Peter then denied it again. Immediately a rooster crowed. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves, otherwise they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. Then Pilate came out to them and said, 'What charge do you bring against this man?' And they answered him, 'If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you.' So Pilate told them, 'Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law.' 'It's not legal for us to put anyone to death,' the Jews declared. And they said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, signifying what kind of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, Are you the king of the Jews?' And Jesus answered, Are you asking this on your own, or have others told you about me?" "I'm not a Jew, am I?" Pilate replied. "Your own nation and chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" "My kingdom is not of this world," said Jesus. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. As it is, my kingdom does not have its origin here." "You are a king then?" Pilate asked. You say that I'm a king, Jesus replied. I was born for this, and I have come into this world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. What is truth, said Pilate. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews and again told them, I find no grounds for charging him. You have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at Passover, so do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they shouted back, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a revolutionary. So Peter, he is standing among the guards of the fire. That's where we left off last week with Peter. Is he had gone in, he was asked by the servant girl, are you one of his disciples? And Peter denied Jesus the first time, and so he goes out into the courtyard. It was a cold night, we're told, and they had, some of the guards and servants outside had built a fire, and so Peter goes by and is hanging out with them at the fire to keep warm. And his goal, his plan, is he wants to see what's going to happen. He wants to be able to see what's going to happen with Jesus. Is Jesus going to be released? What is he going to be crucified or stoned, or what's going on? What's going to happen here? Peter's wanting to see the outcome of what's going to happen. And so he gets confronted 2 more times. The first time he's confronted by some of the people who were right there with him there at the fire. They're like, hey, you kind of sound like a Galilean. In fact, we're told in one of the other Gospels that this is exactly why they're asking. You sound like a Galilean. You got that accent. And that's essentially what they're saying here is you have this Galilean accent. So that means you must be a disciple of Jesus, right? And again, he denies it. He denies not only being a disciple, he denies knowing Jesus. And then a little bit later, this other person, this servant who is a relative of Malchus. Malchus was the one individual when they came to arrest Jesus that Peter tried to cut his head off and cut his ear off, and this relative of Malchus had apparently been there. So again, it kind of gives you an idea that there was a decent sized group, a big group that came to arrest Jesus. So when you see that initial group coming in, like I told you a few weeks ago, it wasn't just, it wasn't Judas and like 2 or 3 other guys. It was a large group of people. And this other servant, who happened to be a relative of Malchus, says, didn't I see you out there in the garden when they arrested Jesus? And Peter, for the 3rd time, denies that he knew Jesus. Now, it's interesting because John doesn't tell us this in his gospel. We were told this in the other gospels, that this 3rd time, not only did Peter deny Jesus, but he cursed. And what that means, it doesn't mean that he just swore that he used a curse word. He's basically saying, let me be cursed if I'm lying. And he curses and denies that he knows Jesus. And all of the gospel writers tell us that immediately after Judas or Peter denies Jesus for the 3rd time, a rooster crows. All 4 of the gospels tell us that. Luke gives us one other little detail, though. Luke tells us that apparently where Peter was situated at the house of Caiaphas, even though he's out in the courtyard, he was able to look into the house where the trial is happening and he could see Jesus. And the moment that Peter denies Jesus the 3rd time, the rooster crows and Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Jesus knew full well that Peter was there. He knew full well exactly what had happened. And Peter, we're told, at that moment, he leaves broken and weeping because he realizes the scope of what he's just done. And he realizes that he had been warned of it. And this is kind of interesting because when you look at Peter's denial of Jesus, it was simultaneously both avoidable and unavoidable. And what I mean by that is this. It's avoidable because Jesus flat out told him, Peter, you're going to deny me tonight. And he tells Peter, you need to Pray so that when you face this temptation, you won't fall. Jesus gave him the instructions on how to avoid it, but he warned him. So it was avoidable in that regard. Peter was told about it. Peter was warned, hey, you're on thin ice. But it's unavoidable when you look at the decisions that Peter made leading up to it. And it starts off with Peter being self-confident. Not confident in the power of Christ, not confident in the power of God to keep him from falling, but confident in self. No, Jesus, I would never. That's where it starts. I would not. I can avoid this. I have the power to overcome the temptation. I have the power to do. No, you don't. Because here's the deal. Satan, he knows right where to hit us. You know, Peter is the one who goes on to write and tell us that Satan goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And Peter became lunch that night. So Peter starts off with this decision of trusting in himself and not trusting and relying and living in the power of God. He instead is relying on his own power and his own strength. Secondly, he refuses to pray. Jesus tells him personally, Peter, pray that you do not fall into temptation. When they're in the garden, he instructs not just Peter, but he instructs all of the apostles, pray with me. Pray for this time. When he comes back and they've all fallen asleep, Jesus wakes them up, says, hey, don't sleep, pray. He goes back and prays, comes back, they're asleep again. Peter refused to pray. He didn't engage in prayer. He did not engage in that prayer life. Then he chose not to remain close to Jesus. When Jesus is arrested, where is Peter? We're told that he followed at a distance. He didn't stay close to Jesus. He decided to sit back and watch and not be engaged. And then, when he gets into the courtyard of Caiaphas, what does he do? He hangs around the wrong people. He hangs around the people that can intimidate him, that can scare him, people that are not disciples of Christ, people that will have a bad influence on him. This is why I say that the denial of Jesus by Peter, it is both avoidable and unavoidable. When you look at the choices that Peter makes leading up to it, what else was going to happen? It is the natural result. Now, where we left off last week, John had told us that Annas, after questioning Jesus, he sent him on to the house of Caiaphas. And that would be the first of the trials that night. And it's interesting because the trial before Caiaphas, we're not told about. John doesn't tell us about it. The first trial before Pilate, John doesn't tell us about. The trial before Herod, John doesn't tell about. John is actually, when you come here, John just skips right to the end. He skips to the last of the trials. And none of the gospel writers record all of the trials. They each share different parts of the trials that Jesus faced that night. But they bring Jesus to Pilate, and Pilate comes in the first trial. When they bring Jesus in, Pilate's like, well, you're from Galilee. This is Judea. Galilee is under the control of Herod, so I'm sending you to Herod. Let him figure out what's going on. Gets to Herod. Herod says, well, I've heard of you, Jesus. And this is great. I've wanted to meet you. I think that you're going to provide some great entertainment for me. And Jesus did not decide to perform for Herod. And so Herod gets frustrated and said, hey, we're in Judea. He can go back to Pilate. And so he sends Jesus back to Pilate, and that's basically where we're picking up here is this return back to Pilate. And Pilate's like, okay, I don't get this. I don't understand what the accusation is. I don't understand what their problem is with you, Jesus. And basically, and I've mentioned this before, but if you want to understand Pilate, there's one thing that you need to know about him, and if you understand that, you will understand everything else about what Pilate does and doesn't do. And it's this. Pilate is a political creature. Pilate's a politician. That's it. If you understand that about Pilate, everything else makes sense. Because his office that he held as governor of Judea, that was a political office that was appointed to him. And it was an office that could be taken from him if he did not perform his responsibilities well. All Pilate wanted and all that Rome needed was for the taxes to be collected and for things to stay peaceful. That's it. And so Pilate, that's all he wants. Collect the taxes and let's not have any problems. And so this is why Pilate tries to shift responsibility over Jesus. Because if he has to take responsibility for Jesus, then he has to report all of this stuff back to Rome. Whereas if he can push the responsibility back onto the Sanhedrin, or he can give it over to Herod, then it's no longer his problem. As long as there's no riots, as long as there's no rebellion, he wants nothing to do with it. He just wants everything to be nice and calm. And so that's what he tries to do. He tries to shift Jesus back to Herod. He tries to shift him back to Sanhedrin. But when he tries to do that, the response comes back, hey, no. You see, Jesus deserves to be executed, and Roman law only allows Rome to execute someone. Even though Jewish law calls for us to execute him, only Rome can execute, and we're under the authority of Rome. So Pilate, you got this. You're stuck with it. And this is interesting. John tells us that this was done so that Jesus would be crucified by Rome. Why is it so important that Rome was the one who executed him? I'm giving you 3 reasons. I can give you a whole lot more, but for the sake of this lesson tonight, I'm going to give you 3 for the sake of brevity. Number 1, prophecy was that Jesus could not have any broken bones. Psalm 34:20 tells us that. Jewish execution was conducted by stoning. And the reality with stoning is the whole point of it and the way it was to be conducted required bones to be broken. They started by pushing someone off a cliff so that they would land and probably break their legs and be unable to move. The goal was for those first people who threw the stones to aim for either the chest or the head because they wanted it to be a quick death. And if you crushed there, then the lungs could be pierced, the heart could be pierced, the head being crushed, it would put them out of their misery faster. That's how it was to be done. It necessitated the breaking of bones. Crucifixion? No. Person, when they were crucified, I know that we oftentimes visualize the nails going through the palms of the hand. That's not how they crucified. They crucified through the wrist, between the 2 forearm bones. Because when the person is hanging on the cross, they wanted the bones to be pulling down. They wanted that structure to be able to hold them onto the cross. Same with the feet. They tried to put the nail between the bones on the feet so that the bones of that individual would be holding them onto the cross. And they died from suffocation. They didn't die from broken bones or from other internal injuries. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that, as Peter himself would point out in Acts 4:27, that both the Jews and the Gentiles had to have responsibility in the death of Jesus. The Jews, of course, arranged for the death of Jesus, but the Romans had to be the one who carried it out. Number three, the third reason is that Jesus himself said that he had to be lifted up. He said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. And so, again, difference between Jewish execution and Roman execution. Romans literally lifted up a person, put him on a cross. Jewish, they pushed him off a cliff. They went down. So, with all of this, this is what's happening. And it's interesting because John gives us one other piece of information here. He tells us that when they go in, basically, there was a Roman compound there in the city of Jerusalem. It's where the barracks were. It's where the Roman governor and all the Roman officials would live. Basically, kind of works like an ancient version of an embassy, if you will. And this is where Pilate was. And John tells us that when Jesus came before Pilate, that the priests refused to go into the Roman compound because that would defile them and they wouldn't be able to participate in the Passover. Because to be in the house of a Gentile, to be in the home of a Gentile, was an unclean act. And again, just think about what they've already done. They have concocted false charges. They've paid people off to bring false charges. They paid off Judas to betray Jesus. They conducted illegal trials in the form in which it happened, as in it happened at night and it was not public. It happened under the authority of Caiaphas, who had already passed judgment on Jesus. They're breaking the law right and left. They also beat Jesus, which was a violation of the law. You do not beat a prisoner. You do not abuse a prisoner. They were breaking all of these laws left and right. But if we go into the house of a Gentile, then we will be corrupted. We'll be impure. And you see the broken thinking here. They violate the law in every way, shape, and form when it suits their purpose, when it suits their goal. That's very much hypocrisy. If it suits their interest, then the law doesn't really apply. But the moment that someone can see them breaking the law, then all of a sudden, oh no, we got to be pure, we got to be holy. And so this is John brings this out that they refuse to go in because they would be impure. They're already impure. They're all the way through. So Pilate comes back in and he starts questioning Jesus. He says, Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And the response of Jesus is what he asked Pilate back. He says, is this your question, or is this a question that they fed you, Pilate? Now, this is an important thing that Jesus is asking him, because Jesus knows the answer already, because he's Jesus. He already knows what's in the heart and the mind of Pilate. But here's what Jesus is trying to do. Jesus is trying to make Pilate think. He's trying to open Pilate's mind and open Pilate's heart, because here's the reality. Jesus is trying to reach Pilate. This is the grace of God being extended to Pilate. Even though Pilate's going to ultimately be the one who verifies and authorizes the crucifixion of Jesus, Jesus is still, in the same way that he did it with Judas, Jesus is still extending the offer of salvation and grace to him. And so he asks, is this you asking Pilate? Or is this what they fed you?
It is very similar to where he said, who do man say that I am?
Mm-hmm.
And when Peter said that art of Christ, he's wanting Pilate to say that.
Yeah, he's wanting Pilate to see the truth. And when you start looking at this conversation between him and Pilate, it becomes very clear that that's what's going on. And so Pilate says, I'm not a Jew. I don't understand all of your Jewish stuff. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm asking for the cause of Rome because I need to know if you're a revolutionary or not. Because that's essentially what they were accusing Jesus of. They had said Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews, which means that he would, and it's further in the next chapter, John lays it out a little bit clearer as far as how this flows and what the accusation is. But essentially they're saying, if you claim to be the king of the Jews, then that means that you're a revolutionary, you're trying to overthrow Rome. And so he says, this is what I'm trying to figure out. Are you a threat to Rome or not? And Jesus' answer comes back, listen, do you see my disciples anywhere? Are my disciples fighting to get me free? Are my disciples attacking Roman garrisons? Have you seen anyone trying to start a revolution against the Roman Empire? Because if I was what they're saying I am, and if my kingdom was just simply a territorial or national dispute, then the way I would be acting and the way my followers would be acting would be completely different. But that's not what you're seeing. Jesus says, my kingdom, mine is of a different world. It's spiritual. It's a different nature. It's not about rivers and lakes and the borders with the sea. It's not about governmental. It's not about politicians. It's about something else. And Pilate says, so you are a king. And Jesus says, you're still missing it, Pilate. You're still missing it. I am here because this is the purpose for which I was born. This is the whole purpose for which I came to this earth. I came to reveal and testify to the truth. He says, and everyone who obeys the truth, everyone who follows the truth, must obey me. That's essentially what he says. So the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Jesus Christ, is made up of those people who obey the truth. Which, of course, this mirrors exactly what Jesus had been telling the disciples the last few hours. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And this is over and over and over again what Jesus has been saying. And so Pilate gets very frustrated here. Because Pilate's thinking, I am asking very simple questions. Are you the king of the Jews? Are you a threat to Rome? I'm asking direct questions, and you are giving me you're giving me philosophy here. And he asks a question, and this question comes in complete frustration. What is truth? And yet it's one of the most profound questions. It is the most important question. Jesus literally just a few hours before this said, I am the way, the life, and the truth. The truth was literally standing in front of Pilate. Jesus had said, if you know the truth will make you free. Jesus was testifying to himself.
And free from sin. And then 3 times right after he asked, what is truth? Pilate said this, I find no fault in you.
And we're about to get there. You're jumping ahead of me, Bill. But It is the most profound and most question. But Pilate's not asking it because he's genuinely interested. Pilate's asking it because he's frustrated. Pilate thinks, I'm just asking a very simple question. I'm just trying to figure out if this guy's a problem or not. If he's guilty of what they're accusing him of. And so he reaches the conclusion, I got nothing. He doesn't seem to be a threat. He's talking stuff I don't really understand, but he himself pointed out that his followers aren't attacking anyone. They're not trying to bang down the doors and break in here. So I don't really see a problem. So he goes back out. He says, listen, I've talked to him. I've interviewed him. And I can't find anything wrong. Now he's speaking specifically of Roman rule. Now the testifying truth is that it's the absolute truth. There is nothing wrong in Jesus. Pilate's perspective is, I don't see that he's broken Roman law at all. I don't find any fault whatsoever in him. He's not trying to overthrow Rome. He's not trying to get Judah out from underneath of Roman rule. He's not a problem. He's not a threat. And so he decides, again, remember, he's a politician. He thinks, I got an idea. I have a way of shifting, again, responsibility for me making the decision on this and putting it on someone else. So what I will do is I will get one of the worst criminals that we currently have, that's a Jew, in custody, and I'll give them an option following the standard custom, which it was a custom by Rome to do this. It was just kind of an act of goodwill towards the Jewish people, just kind of throw them a bone every now and then. Essentially, is how it was treated from the Roman perspective. But at the Passover, they would release one prisoner, and so his thought is, I'll get the worst of them, which is a guy by the name of Barabbas, and I'll give him a choice. We can release Jesus, for whom can't find any evidence that he's committed any crimes, or Barabbas, who has killed multiple people. And I'll give them the choice, and of course, the person that they will pick is Jesus, because Jesus has done nothing wrong. That's his thinking. And so he offers them the choice. And the answer comes back, release to us Barabbas. Now here's what's interesting. John tells us about Barabbas. The other Gospels tell us a little bit about Barabbas as well. They refer to him as a murderer. John tells us that he was a revolutionary. What does that mean? Barabbas had led an attempt to overthrow Roman rule in Judah. And he had been caught. In the course of that attempt, he had killed multiple people. He had been caught, and he was awaiting crucifixion because he was a revolutionary. What is the reason that Jesus was officially, by Roman law, executed for? They accused him of being a revolutionary, of trying to usurp Roman rule. What was the standard Roman punishment for a person who was convicted of treason or revolution? Crucifixion. Barabbas deserved to die on the cross. Jesus didn't. Barabbas was guilty of the crimes for which he was accused. Jesus wasn't. Jesus, quite literally, on the micro scale, took the place of Barabbas. And when we talk about the death of Jesus, what is it that we understand? Is that he was taking our place. He was taking our punishment. Even on the micro scale that day, he was taking the punishment of Barabbas. On the micro scale, we see exactly what Jesus was doing in the spiritual realm at that time. Jesus was literally replacing the guilty with the innocent. He was literally taking the place of Barabbas. The crimes of Barabbas were quite literally laid to the account of Jesus, and Barabbas was declared justified. He was declared righteous in the eyes of Rome because Jesus took his place. That is the beauty of this moment. We look at it so oftentimes when we look at what at the Jews calling for the release of Barabbas, and we say, look at how wicked their hearts were, look at how corrupt their hearts were. It's not a picture of the corruption and the wickedness of Jews or Gentiles or of mankind. Even on the micro scale, we see Jesus doing the exact thing that he had come to this earth for. And it is revealed through the physical translation and transition with him and Barabbas of what Jesus was doing on the spiritual scale for each and every one of us.
It's amazing. I mean, because God, he orchestrated all of this. Mm-hmm. His own God, Jesus, he was in control of it. Was all his plan. Mm-hmm. He was so willing to do this for us.
Yeah. It wasn't random chance that led Barabbas to be rescued by Jesus that day. It was the plan of God to show exactly what Jesus was doing. Again, what did Jesus tell Pilate? This is the reason I'm here for. I am fulfilling the purpose for which I came. Everything that's happening that we see in the crucifixion, this is not the defeat, or this is not Satan celebrating, this is not Satan rejoicing. This is Jesus being victorious. And like I said, on the micro scale, we see that in Barabbas. We will pick up in chapter 19 next